Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you to introduce today's panel discussion. I'm a big fan of the JIBF, and especially our fellowship program, which I like to call the most important sister and brotherhood in book publishing worldwide. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to congratulate Julian Barnes on behalf of everyone at Penguin Random House for being awarded the Jerusalem Prize this year. I personally share Julian's spirit of guarded optimism about the future. And optimism is precisely what I'd like to talk about today. Over the years, many of you have heard me talk about the best time in publishing, also at a panel discussion at the last in-person book forum in Jerusalem in 2019. In fact, since 2017, I've been on a global roadshow to try and change the public and internal view on the future of our industry for the better and convey my fact-based optimism. Unsurprisingly, during the global pandemic in the last 15 months, many people have been asking me if I still think it is the best time in publishing. And my answer is yes, sure. Why are you asking? Just look at the data. Let me briefly outline 6 reasons why this is still the best time in publishing ever since Gutenberg invented the printing press some 600 years ago, and how these reasons all held true or even accelerated during the Corona crisis. First, the global book market is growing, i.e., the revenue pool of our industry is growing. That means that every year consumers around the world are spending more money on books than the year before. The last 15 months have proven again that books are resilient commercially and essential culturally. While every day brought more uncertainty and people were trapped inside, they turned to books. And the demand for books spiked in many countries around the world. And with that surge in demand, we saw historical market growth numbers in countries with a strong e-commerce presence and a functioning and open supply chain to fulfill this demand, like in the US and the UK. Second reason, our business models for the physical and digital distribution of our stories have been remarkably stable. In essence, books have navigated the digital transformation very well, because we actually have a functioning and profitable business model for the digital distribution of our books. Which brings me to third. We have reached what I call a healthy coexistence between the physical and digital share of our book sales. Print books still, and again, account for roughly 80% of our global sales. This was even true last year when people shifted to buy more books online. The lion's share of last year's growth came from printed books, again. Fourth, our addressable audience is growing. In other words, we are gaining new readers every year because the world population is growing and literacy rates are spiking, bringing more people into our ecosystem each year. And e-commerce has enabled us to reach readers with our stories in all formats, quickly and efficiently in every corner of the world. Fifth, and maybe most importantly, kids' books have been the fastest growing category for the last 25 years. And last year we saw record growth rates in the children's category when parents around the world searched for new ways to entertain and educate the kids at home. This results in new and larger generations of readers going forward. And finally, sixth, digital audiobooks are booming and are partially incremental, i.e. audio is not just cannibalizing other formats. So we are gaining net reading or listening minutes through the audio format. So based on these and many other facts and data, which have been holding true before and during the Corona crisis, I hope you agree that the best is yet to come for our beloved book publishing business. So what's going to happen after COVID, which segues nicely into our panel discussion? Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I remain optimistic because I'm sure that during the crisis, we've created many new readers around the world who will continue the habit of book buying and reading. Books continue to matter, even more so in our polarized world. So our social and societal assignment remains the same, namely to create the future of books and reading for generations to come. And boy, are we in a great position to achieve that cultural ambition and purpose. Let me finish with our very Margaret Atwood, whose quote captured so brilliantly why we should remain optimistic beyond the data. She said, "You're never going to kill storytelling because it's built into the human plan. We come with it." With that, I hand it over to the panel. Thank you.
Discussion 2021 JIBF. My name is Ziv. On the panel, you can see 4 distinguished guests: Madeline McIntosh, Grayhawk, Yaniv, and Michael Cader. And I'll be introducing each one before they speak. My personal starting point when we were thinking about this panel, how to think about what we've been through over the last 15 months, I took a quote from Arundhati Roy, the novelist, who wrote very early on in the pandemic, quote, "Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This pandemic is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between our world and the next." If you'd have told me 15 months ago that I'd be living in a world where it would be illegal to hug my daughter or mother, and as a publisher, I would be publishing entirely backlist, and all my sales would be online, I would think this was unthinkable, unimaginable. But here we are. When I wrote to my fellow panelists here, I asked them to try and talk about their take on the pandemic from both the personal and the professional point of view. Used a couple of sort of cute phrases like predicting the past. Can we reimagine? Would we have done things differently if we could go back 15 months, a year? Would we have done things differently? And also remembering the future. Can we imagine how much of what we have learned will we take into the future with us? It's been a crazy 15 months. And at least in Israel, we are now very much with our heads looking towards the future. As of the last week in February, we are in our company, we're all back in the office, working regularly, 100% capacity. And we are publishing books again for the first time in many, many, many months, which is a wonderful thing. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce first Michael Cader, who is the creator of the Publishers Lunch newsletters and the publishersmarketplace.com website. And I must just add, Michael, probably one of the only 2 or 3 websites that I visit every single day of my life, including weekends. So thank you for everything you've done for the publishing. Go ahead.
Thank you for the intro, and thank you for visiting every day. As Ziv mentioned, one of the things he suggested to us in the intro was a lot of the major themes of the book market's resilience, and in some markets, real growth, as Markus was saying, have been pretty well covered by now. And he did encourage us to come at this discussion from some fresh vantage points. One thing he asked clearly about was our regrets from this last year. And my biggest concern, although generally and philosophically I agree with where Markus is coming from, that there's a lot to be excited about in book business, and we should be our best selves and be our best advocates. One of my regrets still is that our relief and enthusiasm about the overall performance of trade publishers has left us a little bit unwilling or uncomfortable to look honestly at the people and sectors of the business who did suffer measurably during this past year. That begins with authors, and we're going to hear from one later in this panel conversation, who are, of course, at the core of everything in publishing. Backlist did indeed do better than ever, but that in turn means new books did not perform well for the most part. And that's going to have an effect on those authors in particular for some time to come. As we know, new books were challenged by everything from closed stores to postponed release dates, printing shortages, curtailed marketing and publicity, Authors also suffered from reduction of other income streams that don't come straight from their books, right? So reduced speaking engagements, curtailed teaching jobs, freelance work, all the other things that authors depend on that their profile helps bring to them. Furthermore, while transactions for new book contracts, to the extent that we can log them and measure those in Publishers Marketplace, were indeed strong during the year, except for a brief period at the beginning of the pandemic, we did see that the publisher investment in larger advances seemed somewhat curtailed. And we do know that publishers, as they were conserving cash, often moved to spread out their advances further, which obviously has a direct effect on authors. Also, we did see sub-rights sales across international territories fall for a while. Last year was a rare decrease for us in sub-rights transactions. That's picked up again, but again, that too often flows directly to authors' bottom lines. Online sales did indeed do better, fantastically well. But that means sales of physical bookstores, both chains and independents, were significantly impaired, and an uncomfortably large number of booksellers lost their jobs or their wages. The damages to those stores and those people is going to take a while to recover from, and some of the market share and customers that gravitated to online probably will not be recovered, at least not easily. And book sales indeed were strong in the aggregate, but that makes it easy to overlook the many categories, the many specialty publishers, whether it's travel books or illustrated books or gift books or religious books, or books that are particularly suited to being sold in special outlets like museum stores or college stores, may have also suffered considerably and will also take some time to recover. On the other hand, we're going to stay positive, as Markus suggested, and as Ziv wanted us to also look at what might stick from this experience in terms of driving innovation and practices for the future. To me, in part because I come at this from a website operational background, I think one important lesson is going to be doing a better job of avoiding what computer systems people call a single point of failure. So that one big warehouse servicing all your needs efficiently is great, except when that facility can't operate, right? And the economics of offset printing are great, except when you can't get capacity to print your books when you need them or when that facility is closed. And one big office in a major city seemed efficient and effective. You have your whole team together, pulling together until the office was closed indefinitely. So I think we're going to see an acceleration of all kinds of things: print-on-demand capability, distributed in multiple locations, and efforts to support a wider dispersion of distribution facilities as well. We're already seeing people rethink their office spaces and where employees live in ways that will diversify capabilities, as well as make people happier and reduce costs. For bookstores, the physical store itself turned out to be the single point of failure. Having a robust online offering, providing customer-friendly delivery and pickup options, having an intermediary like Ingram or someone else dispatch any title directly to a customer's home, engaging for real with digital formats, even if the margins are lower, and developing patronage and subscription models are elements that stores will come out of this, the elements that the stores that do come out of this okay are going to perform even better than ever once they're back on their feet. For online sales, even though a single company, Amazon, seems to have been by far the biggest beneficiary of the increases, we also learned that customers are more than willing to go to other places to get the books they want, but they have to be available for sale. That could sustain some real investment now in online bookselling fulfillment from a variety of players, from direct competitors like a Booktopia in Australia that saw tremendous growth, to retailers big and small from outside of our business, and from publishers and others. Whether it was the success of a new launch like bookshop.org or another startup, Publica internationally, we saw that this idea of distributed bookstores, making anyone and everyone an effective bookselling affiliate or customized storefront, can have real power in the aggregate, and it's something that we need to encourage and spread. Digital formats, both ebook and audio, look like they will hold on to their gains and continue to grow. We're seeing companies like Storytel upend expectations about eagerness for digital adoption, and markets that had seen less digital uptake previously and thought they might be immune from this whole digital thing are now going to see continued growth and adoption. And with educational materials getting an accelerated and lasting transition to digital, we should really expect a generation of people more comfortable than ever with digital reading and consumption. Now, as Markus was also suggesting, some of those increased sales came from new or returning or lighter readers. And clearly the way to make our business continue to grow is by expanding the audience. We saw once again, the audience is much bigger than we ever could have imagined, and we just need to continue to figure out how to reach them well. So that means continuing to rethink everything, right? From whom we hire and what we commission, to how and where we market and sell, and more flexibility in pricing models. As a small case in point there, even though publishers don't always like to talk about these pricing models, during the pandemic, a number of publishers relaxed some of their library licensing practices and pricing models. They still saw increases in both their library sales as well as their direct consumer digital sales. Now, the other interesting thing that might or might not persist, and on which much hangs in the balance, is publishers' profits. So sales did pretty well for large publishers, as we know, but in many cases, profits did even better, in large part because of all those expenses that got cut during the pandemic. Executives are now taking a hard look at rethinking how those saved dollars get redeployed in the future. Those answers, I believe, will say a lot about whether we go back to things as they were or to a newly reinvented publishing. With that, I'll leave it on to the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And before we go on to Madeline, I just forgot to say previously that if anyone wants to ask the panel or anyone specifically or as a collective a question, feel free to ask a question in the Zoom chat and they will get transferred to me somehow through the magic of the internet. And now on to Madeline, who has been the CEO of Penguin Random House US since 2018. She's worked in publishing for almost 3 decades in a variety of roles, including pioneering positions in online sales, audio publishing, and the digital transition. Go ahead, Madeline.
Thank you, Ziv, and thank you for having me here. I just wish I could see everybody out there for once. I thought I would start by giving a little bit of context about how our experience here in the US did diverge, I think, in notable ways from what many of you experienced in other countries. Certainly, as citizens, it was just as frightening, certainly more chaotic at points, and just as frustrating as in many other places. But that same degree of kind of chaos and inconsistency that was present in the US in 2020 actually made it a little bit easier for businesses to function. So the fact that we did not really have a consistent approach to national lockdowns or restrictions meant that, even though that made no sense from a science perspective, from a business perspective, it meant that that many retailers, many different kinds of businesses were able to kind of keep through even during some of the most difficult periods. So, for example, you'd have we had national book retailers who, even when they had to shut down in some parts of their chain, were able to keep some stores open in other parts. Or another example would be that big mass merchandisers and grocery chains were deemed essential businesses. And so they were able to continue to operate every day. And that included, luckily for us, selling books. The other major factor that I think made the experience in the US a little bit different for us is that we were already a very much an online anchored or online dominated market. And so while, as Michael rightly described, there were definitely retailers who had kind of thought they could just ignore this online thing, and they very much had to get with the online program, and many of them did. But the fact is that consumers did not need to be trained in how to get anything they could possibly want online. And so those were 2 major factors that I think did make it a little easier for the US to get through. When I look back to a year ago, at least through the end of April, it was a very, very dark period. It really felt like doomsday was drawing nigh. We were having to make decisions hour by hour as to whether to keep publishing. And in our case, we did keep publishing. Because we were able to. We kind of had the feeling that every day that our warehouses were open or that distributors were open was a gift, and we just had to keep running as fast as we could until doomsday happened. So that very dark period then surprisingly led into a little bit later into May, this even more surprising recovery. And this is when we discovered, really much to our surprise, that once consumers had taken care of all of their essential needs, they were now grabbing books. And this meant, this has all been very well documented, but just as a reminder, in the US, they were grabbing first books for their kids who were stuck home, not able to go to school. Then you could kind of see them go through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Then adults started reaching for books for their own entertainment and sense of escape or stress relief. And then finally, as we moved into June, we had very different development, which is that as we as a country were very much trying to reckon with the stark legacy of racism in our culture, books became essential items in the process of self-education. I don't want to make it sound as though, I mean, in certainly the numbers, you can just look at them and think, my God, this must have all been really easy for the Americans. I don't want to make it sound like we sailed through this without a care in the world. It was for every single one of us, it was certainly the most stressful period of our professional lives, and for many of us also of our personal lives. We had to, on a dime, completely reinvent how to keep publishing that front list as well as the back list from home in about a day. We had to, all of the marketers, if you think about it, that marketers spend a lot of energy on very long range planning. All of those plans got trashed in a minute. And they had to really start on this discipline of just take it one day at a time, 1 week at a time. We don't know how consumers are going to be feeling next week, so let's just focus on what they're thinking right now and do all of it online, all of it in digital. We had to also, as Michael said, we had to print more books, ship more books with less capacity than we'd ever had. And above all, and most importantly, we had to figure out how to keep ourselves and our employees, those in the warehouses and those who are at home, safe and healthy. But we did make it through, and it does indeed feel like a miracle. And I think it feels like something that we will be interpreting for the rest of our lives. There were, while things were very difficult for booksellers, they fared much better than we would have thought this time last year. Many fewer booksellers ended up leaving the market than we feared might happen. In the US, as we've said, there were actually 150 million more, I believe, print books sold in the US in 2020 than the year before. And perhaps most importantly, that idea of the occasional readers, that books became central to people who before had been occasional readers, and people who were regular readers read even more. So when I think about predictions, people are always asking about making predictions. I often try to avoid them just out of humility. I know that we're almost always wrong. But I don't know what is going to happen once we all get to kind of leave our cocoons and go out into the world. But I do believe that there is reason to look forward with optimism. And even more than that, I think there is reason for all of us in the trade worldwide to be very proud of what we all got through together. And I have to say, if we got through this, I think the sky has got to be the limit in what we can achieve. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Madeline. On that subject of prediction, I just got this great quote from Alvin Toffler, who wrote Future Shock back in 1970. And he said, when it comes to predicting the future, it is far more important to be imaginative than it is to be right. And I think what you've just told us about how you guys coped with an unimaginable situation with imagination, that's a great testament to that. Okay, now we're going to hear from Gray, who, is it Gray next or Yaniv? I can't remember. Let's go to Gray.
Yeah.
Gray. Yeah, Gray? So Gray's been a literary agent since 2004, based in Taiwan. He's the founder of the Grayhawk Agency, representing foreign clients in the Chinese language and Southeast Asian markets, as well as Asian authors in the international market. And also a great guy and one of the founders of the fellowship at the Taipei International Book Fair, which I was privileged to be a part of. And he is Mr. Taipei for me. Go ahead, Gray.
Thank you, Ziv. I miss Jerusalem. I was a JIBF fellow in 2011, and I can't believe it's been a decade since I was last. I think I'm coming from a very different place, as Taiwan has been quite successful containing the COVID pandemic since the beginning, and we've had only about 1,000 cases and 12 deaths to date, which is a miracle. So we've been living in this safety bubble in the past years. We go everywhere. We're in a face mask and we wash hands regularly. But aside from that, life has been pretty much normal. Theaters, stores, restaurants, shopping malls stay open, and there was never really a lockdown, which is the ironic thing, because we are allowed to go out and there are way more options to spend your time with than reading books, and book sales just suffered. Editors were so distracted and anxious that they basically stopped acquiring new books. So while we were able to go to the office as usual, our submissions at the agency were often met with complete silence. And while I was sitting at my desk, safe and sound, the world out there was struggling with the COVID, and yet book sales have this resurging, booming, because that's pretty much the only thing you can do in many markets. It was beyond surreal. But what kind of books sold in Taiwan? It was mostly about making money. 25% of last year's top 100 bestsellers are books about investment and personal finance. Everyone was trying to make money from the booming stock market West, which again was quite surreal. And China is another story. The lockdown hit early and hit hard. And although life returned to normal fairly soon compared to the US and Europe, book sales dropped almost 20% in 2020 in China. We're talking 15% in 2019 to -5% in 2020. So it's also the first time in 20 years that the Chinese book market sees a decline. And what's especially worrying is the fact that the sales from physical bookstores, which were already quite weak, only got weaker. But that's to retailers who continue to discount it quite aggressively, but to less and less effect. And another, which is probably the bigger problem, is the ISBNs. As some of you know, it's been difficult to publish American authors in China since 2019, thanks to the trade war. Publishers simply can't get ISBNs for these books. But now in 2020, an even more pressing problem, the overall number of ISBNs is also decreasing, which means it's harder to publish any translation, regardless of the author's nationality. Many Chinese publishers these days fight over foreign ones. And under such circumstances, 2020 was very much a year of the backlist in China. And all the top bestsellers are old titles which have been there for years. And we did not see any really new titles that break out. The good news is that we are definitely seeing a bit of comeback in both Taiwan and China this year. Publishers are again requesting materials and making offers. Even turning down stuff is good. China, we've been doing a lot of renewal deals, and it once again demonstrates the power of the backlist. Was I worried last year? I was very worried. It was this sense of powerlessness when I knew that financially we're fine, we could take the hit and survive. But I didn't know when this pandemic would end and how and if and when the market would come back. What I'm probably most proud of is that we have been completely cloud-based agency since 2012, mainly working with Google and Dropbox and Slack. We began pushing for DocuSign aggressively in 2019. And if there is one good thing that came out of COVID, I would say e-signature is really, I mean, it's a lifesaver, and it saves so much time, so much effort. And anyway, by the time the COVID hit, we were already familiar with this practice and had pretty much converted about half of the publishers we work with. And now everyone was using it, of course. And on a personal level, I think I'm most proud of is that I listened to 130 audiobooks last year. I've never read so much in my life. And although 90% of it is still work, a lot of them are not. And I was able to follow, the bestseller list. And it's this wonderfully liberating experience. And I look forward to continuing that this year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gray. And now on to our very own Yaniv Iczkovits, who is an Israeli author and teacher, author of Pulse from 2007, Adam and Sophie 2009, The Slaughterman's Daughter 2015, and most recently, No One Leaves Palo Alto 2020. Slaughterman's Daughter recently won the Wingate Literary Prize and was chosen by The Economist and the Sunday Times as one of the 10 best fiction books of 2020, and by Kirkus Reviews as one of the 10 books to read in the US in 2021. Yaniv, b'kasha.
Hi, thanks for having me here. Well, I can share my own personal story of 2020. Basically, it started from February. My book, The Slaughterman's Daughter, was published in the UK. And following that, I was supposed to fly to London. I already had my plane tickets. And afterwards, I had a tour in France and Italy and Australia and New Zealand. And unfortunately, as you know, I think that the word was supposed to were often repeated in 2020. So basically, I had a book coming out worldwide, and I couldn't promote it. And it's crazy. It's like I have a friend from the high-tech industry, and he told me it's like your company is going to an IPO on the Nasdaq, and the CEO is not there. He's like taking a vacation or something like that. So it was really crazy. And moreover, I just finished a new novel in Israel, No One Leaves Palo Alto, which was already printed, and it just waited for distribution to the bookstores. And I remember my publisher calling me early March, telling me we're not going to publish it. I'm not going to kill your book. So basically, the could have been celebrated March became a total farce. And I started to think about it. I started to try and revive myself with all sorts of there are going to be other tours, and it's more time with your family, and the food in London, no offense, is not that good. But I actually remember listening to someone from the news, and he was saying something like that the pandemic is here to teach us something, like we need to learn a lesson. And I was really upset with this sentence because I realized that just like him, I was making all kinds of stories just to feel more uplifted and less depressed. And I really had this aha moment about the COVID, that I realized that it's basically and essentially it's a really bad story. I mean, I usually appreciate God's storytelling capabilities, But I really believe that he or she in 2020 were on the verge of a creative crisis, and it happens once in a while. And it's like the second season of Twin Peaks. I mean, you know that the creator is brilliant, but you can't get anything from what's going on. You know, it's like
there was no editor.
Yeah, probably there was no editor. So and you want what kind of story is it? I mean, the villain is a virus, so you can't blame it. You want to blame your parents as you usually do, but you are too worried for them. So basically you are just left with a really bad story, making bad stories just to make you feel good in this bad story. And it's like a vicious circle. So when I realized that after the first lockdown was over in Israel, I called my publisher and I told her, look, we have to publish, we have to go out. Something needs to happen. And she was like, look, the second lockdown is going to be within a month. So what are you doing? You're going to kill your book. And I told her, look, something needs to change. And it felt like I'm a prisoner, you know, in front of the jail committee or something like that. And I don't know why, but she said yes. And we published in August 2020, just 1 month before the second lockdown was ordered. And basically, I think it's the best decision I made in 2020, because I was really, really surprised to see the reaction. I mean, it immediately boomed, and I don't mean only sales. I also mean the reaction of the readers. It was like, because no one published in August 2020. So there were no new books. And I felt like the readers were really hungry for something new. I know that the backlist has really surged, but I think that it's really important also to publish new books, because, you know, as a culture, as writers, you know, the time and the place are important for certain books. And what also made me happier is that a lot of people, I got a lot of messages in WhatsApp and Facebook, you know, and a lot of people said that television was not enough. And I was really happy about it. Like, you know, you have Netflix, you have Amazon, you have everything. But I think that people were looking for something more intimate, maybe to escape, maybe something more, you know, even my daughters that I usually read because their dreadful father forces them to read. Even they took books from the shelves and started to read. So I think that in terms of the pandemic, something really special happened with books. And even in the Zoom sessions, you know, everyone, I was having lots of Zoom sessions, which are basically considered more distant and more remote. I think I had some really emotional events, and I felt for the first time, you know, usually you have readers, they love you, they hate you, they're indifferent. Okay, but this time I felt something else. I felt a sense of gratitude, you know, like, thanks for letting us read something new in 2020, and it was a really nice experience, and it brought about a lot of new things, you know, adaptation for television, lots of lectures. It's kind of so I believe that basically COVID-19, you know, as a bad story, taught me that sometimes there's nothing to learn. I mean, if you just do whatever you do and you keep doing it and you stay resilient, obviously you need to change, you know, and you need to adjust, and you need to be agile and flexible and all these high-tech words. But at the end of the day, what I did in 2020 is publish a book, which is what I usually do. And that really helped me to go through this really rough year. So that's my main lesson, basically.
Thank you. Thank you. Toda, Yaniv, thank you.
Okay. Welcome.
Just a couple of comments in general, and then we can have a quick discussion between us. and then we can open it up to questions. In our company, which is, has the largest trade publishing house, we went from publishing almost 300 new books a year to publishing 0 books a year. And it was a total revolution. We redesigned our website and to make it a commercial website within the first month of COVID in March 2020. Immediately opened up our warehouse because we were allowed to sell directly from the warehouse. But all the bookstores in Israel were shut. So we luckily we have a huge catalog, thousands of backlist titles, and that's what we sold. We survived on backlist for an entire year. Admittedly, we were selling at discounted prices, but the volume of sales was massive, and that helped us through this crisis. So, the power of an online commercial presence, which we should have done, well before COVID forced us to do it. That was a lesson well learned. The power of the backlist can never be overlooked. Never, ever be overlooked. It's massive. And in terms of marketing and virtual, and Madeline alluded to this, talking about your marketing team sort of planning week by week, we've definitely noticed a peak of how much you can virtually market a book. I think there is definite case of Zoom fatigue, at least in my immediate publishing circle. And we've had these virtual book fairs, the virtual Frankfurt, the virtual London. Meetings have been spread out over a sort of 6-week period. I personally found it exhausting. I can't wait to get back to face-to-face meetings. I think there's no replacement for that. And publishing is all about personal chemistry, and it's not necessarily about the scheduled meeting. It's about the whispered piece of gossip you hear, at midnight over a drink, and that's where you learn stuff when people gather, publishing people gather. Is there anything anyone wants to respond to? Anyone's comments?
Well, I would say that, we all, Zoom fatigue is real, as you said, and we have all grown very weary of just interacting with each other on screens. But I also think, and authors, certainly, there are many authors who are anxious to get back into regular tours. But I also think it would be a mistake to just toss aside everything that we've learned to do on screen, and that really, there are many things about describing a hybrid future that sounds like a trap that's just going to be inconvenient. But I think the real magic will come when we understand that we now learned how to do a whole new set of things, and we integrate that with the things that we already knew how to do. And so for those authors who make their magic by going out on a multi-city bookstore tour, that will be the best way to showcase them. But there are others who have proved themselves to be masters of bringing together almost thematically grouped different sets of readers via the screen. So just as with return to offices or staying remote, I think the idea of marketing is that we need to really integrate all of these different things.
I actually read this week, I think on Michael's website, of course, that you, Madeline, you actually did a very deep research into employees' wishes about working office, home. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of responses you were getting?
Yes. I knew that we had different feelings out in our very dispersed set of employees, but I didn't really have a way to quantify them. So I knew that there were the employees who were really actually thriving at home, and then the other employees who were desperate to get back into the offices. But it was very hard to tell what the numbers were going to look like. So we did a survey back in, I think, February, and The numbers did surprise me. I think they've now lined up with other kinds of surveys that have taken place in other fields, but more than half of our employees said that they want to continue to work primarily from home. That doesn't mean they don't want to see each other, but that they have found themselves very productive at home. Clearly, having a headquarters in New York means that there are people with miserable commutes. Nobody ever wants to get a New Jersey Transit again. So more than half the people want to continue to be primarily working from home. About somewhere in the less than 10% described more or less just wanting to get back to the way things were. And then everybody else in that middle range of about 40% what they really want is flexibility. They don't know exactly how that's going to map in the future. So knowing that, and because we want to avoid kind of that trap issue of trying to operate meetings where half the people are in the room and half are on the screen, that's why we are leaning into the idea of very much being remote friendly going forward, where if you've got a scheduled routine kind of information sharing meeting, just do it on the screen. If it's about social interaction, then by all means, get together in person.
Yeah. Michael, have you been hearing anything in terms of that issue about where people actually physically work? I mean, in the broader picture internationally?
I think what Madeline said, I think the experience at Penguin Random House is probably similar to what other executives are hearing from their employees. It obviously varies depending upon exactly which company, how big is the company, what kind of books do they publish, what were their physical facilities like before. But I'm certainly hearing similar things from a lot of people as they figure out both how to get employees together so that the idea of working in teams and not always being digitally connected can happen again. But I do think people awaken to the possibility of a flexible work construct. I mean, to make it personal, I told people I've been preparing for the pandemic for over 20 years, right? I've run a virtual company since I started Publishers Lunch and Publishers Marketplace. And until about a year ago, nobody really understood what that meant or what it felt like. And when I went to go recruit people, I'd have to tell them very carefully, you're going to be home alone. I mean, I'm going to be talking to you online all the time. We're going to be typing to each other all the time. We'll have a meeting every 2 or 3 weeks just to say hi. But it's very flexible. It can be wonderful or it can be terrible depending upon how you're constituted. So, I think what I'm hearing is that companies are going to figure out how to best accommodate all their different employees, right? And the idea that one work construct works for everybody, or that the company has a single work construct and you have to conform to that work construct or not, is going out the window, which, as I said before, I think will be all to the good, right? We've had this problem where we're supposed to be publishing for everyone all across our countries, all across the world, but the whole company's in one place. So you only get a single frame of perspective and you don't have people out there in different places talking about books and connecting to their communities. So I think executives get that, both because they're hearing it from their employees, but also because they've been awakened to the possibilities. I mean, particularly since in the US and some other countries, we've had this great reawakening of social justice and equity and diversity. And you can't be diverse if everybody's all in the same place. That's inherently not diversity, right? So I think we're going to see a lot of different approaches, but as Madeline said, I think most of them are going to be flexible.
Okay. Any other comments? Because we have some questions already coming up on the screen. Can we go ahead with questions? Okay. So first of all, here there's a question about, are there specific books or categories, genres of books that did better than others within the backlist? I can answer from our perspective in Israel, it's been very, very apparent. People have been looking for the more escapist, in terms of fiction at least, escapist fiction, especially historical women's fiction. That has been the genre. Lucinda Riley that type of book, that's been going very, very well here. And I would say, and literary fiction has also done well. And of course, the top thrillers. But I've definitely seen more and more what we call speculative fiction coming out in the US and the UK market. That hasn't arrived here no one really wants to read about a pandemic in a novel here. Not yet. Maybe that will come. But please answer for your own markets. Great. Go in China, in Taiwan.
Yeah. So last year in fiction in China, I think the only genre that hasn't been affected much is science fiction, which is very interesting. So the Three Body Problem, the trilogy, has been on the bestseller list, top 10 for I think over 5 years at least. And the strangely thing is that even the publishers continues to acquire these books, regardless of their nationality. Even for American authors, they're fine. But we're seeing a lot of other publishers who would say no to, say, a literary fiction or a thriller by the American authors. But for science fiction, they're fine. They just keep buying them. I think that was the big genre in China. And in Taiwan, as I said previously, it was mostly about personal finance, investment, books about financial freedom. And I think in both Taiwan and China, the parenting books are working really well because a lot of kids stay at home. Yeah.
And
Okay.
I can say in the US, it was kind of the remarkable thing was just watching the wave where every category ended up recovering. So initially it was the kids' books, as I said, and there were the categories that disproportionately boomed, like children's workbooks. But then fiction recovered, all kinds of fiction. And then the final holdout, interestingly enough, was business books, which had been growing year after year after year. And if you think about it, it made sense because many of those sales were really supported by the authors doing in-person speaking events. So that was down. That was the last category to recover, but it has finally recovered and is up. Within adult fiction and kids fiction, I would just point out that the subcategory that has done the best is unfortunately one that I don't have as much of, which is graphic novels and manga. Just absolute skyrocketing sales here in the US. So
yeah, that's definitely true. In Europe, Italy and Spain, unbelievable success of that. That comes well in China as well, right? Manga is very, very strong. There's a question here about live book fairs, international book fairs in 2021. Do any of us believe? I mean, I have my tickets for Frankfurt and a hotel room booked, but am I going to be there? What do you think?
I don't know when the book fairs will open up again. I think that we've all kind of examined the idea. There were just too many of us were going. I will just speak for Penguin Random House. It had become way too much, too many people who don't necessarily need to be there. So I think in the future, when the fairs are back in action, we will be there, but it will be really the people who should be there and not kind of feeling like the entire company is flying from New York to Frankfurt. But I don't know which. I'm not going to predict which fair is going to be the next one.
I don't think we'll be going to Frankfurt this year, but I've been thinking of this crazy idea about, how difficult it is always to book hotels for Frankfurt. And I'm thinking of, even if the fair doesn't happen this year, the price will probably be pretty cheap. So I can just pay. I can book for one of my dream hotel, and so I can lock down for next year, even if I'm not going this year. I'm seriously thinking about this.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else got anything? Any other comments? Because I think we're out of time. Are we done? Well, in that case, thank you so much for contributing, and let's all stay in touch. Be well. Be safe, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.